And then weekly is a connect with another person where we ask each other really relevant questions to try to stay honest and also encourage each other. So I'm not into like accountability where we're beating each other up for not being enough. Right. I feel like we have enough of that going on in our lives. But where we're really just saying like we're in this together and we're rooting for each other and we're going to help each other. And how is it going really? And how are you really? And how can I pray and help?
Welcome to the Global Fringe podcast hosted by April Diaz. This is a show featuring leading voices from the fringe, mostly women and people of color who are on the journey to live and lead with wholeness. This season will guide you on your own journey towards wholeness in body, mind, and spirit in full partnership with men. It's time.
Hey friends, welcome back to the Global Fringe. This season, it's proving to be fire already. We are focusing on wholeness in life and leadership and what partnership looks like between men and women in all spaces. And I am so excited about today's guest. We have our second Canadian ever to be featured on the Global Fringe, Danielle Strickland. Welcome to the podcast. Representing
Happy
Canada.
To be here.
Hey, if you guys do not know Danielle, let me give you just a little bit of who she is, the dynamic, the power, the wonder that is her. She is a total entrepreneur. She's a justice advocate to the bone, which is why I have been so just drawn to her work over the last several years as I have learned about what it is that she is doing all over the world. She's established justice departments for the Salvation Army, which she's basically been a part of her whole life, but for over 20 years as an officer. She has launched anti-trafficking global initiatives. She's created movements to establish and mobilize people towards transformational living. And today, what that looks like for her, she has launched 4 different initiatives. So every time I get her emails, I'm like, I don't know how this woman like sleeps even, or how she is ever at home, because she is doing this amazing thing called Infinitum, the Amplify piece, Brave Global, and something that I experienced earlier this year called the Women's Speaker Collective. And not only that, but there's a podcast that she does. She's written 5 books. The 6th one is coming out in January. It's called It's Better Together, and how women and men can work together better. So that'll be out in January. We're going to link all of this to the show notes, because after you hear this conversation today, you are going to want to dive more into the work that she is doing, the woman that she is. She is all about leading people to live differently. And so, Danielle, I'm so grateful for you to be on this episode today, talking about wholeness, talking about what it looks like for us to walk through the stages of transition. And it's going to dovetail really nicely because our mutual friend, Ashley Island, was on just recently, and she talked about like the real life in the trenches transitions that take place and what loss looks like in the midst of that. And so I think that the image that you have around these stages of transition will be so helpful for people to kind of get a bigger view of how it is that we engage transition. Because if you're a living, breathing human, transition has either just happened, you're in the middle of it, or it's coming down the road in just a minute. And so I would love for you to kind of give us this bird's eye view, kind of an overarching picture of this beautiful picture that you have of a tree and how that speaks to our life in the stages of transition.
Yeah, great. So this is kind of a beautiful image for me. It has been anyway, from Ephesians 3, actually, in the Bible. It talks about our roots being planted deep within the soil of God's love, so that we would be able to grasp kind of how wide and high, long is the love of God. And I really wrestled, when you mention all the things that I do, a lot of people say like, that's a lot of things. And so I often wonder, like, maybe it is too many things. Like what should I cut? Like, what should I not do? Like, and should I just work on my deepening spiritual life, like integrated, beautiful depth, or should I do all these things? And I felt that when I was asking God this one time, I felt like God led me to Ephesians 3 and said it's both. you do both at the same time. And actually the deeper you go, the deeper you're rooted, the more expanse you'll be able to experience and uncover and see and participate in. So that tree really ministers to me a lot, because the deeper the roots, the higher the tree. And they can be competing, but they don't have to be. They actually can be, symbiotic. They go together.
I love the image of a tree because, scripture has a lot of places, but it begins with a tree in the garden. It ends with the tree of life in Revelation. And then in Psalm 1, in the very middle of it all, it's this image of a tree bearing fruit in any and every season. So I think that the tree actually can represent and symbolize a lot for us. Can you talk to us about what these roots look like?
Yeah. So for me in my life, one of the things that you mentioned that I do is this thing called infinitum, or infinitum, if it helps people. It's hard to pronounce. It's Latin for the word boundless. And it basically is attention to the depth. It's meant to be a journey down into the boundless ocean that is God's love, kind of thing. And so I do some rhythms and practices that help me on a daily, weekly, monthly basis to keep digging, to keep paying attention to the roots. It sounds really simple, but what I've discovered is that simple isn't easy. And sometimes we get lost looking for complicated, when what we really need is just to practice simple things. So for me, daily, it's morning, night. So morning, I use what I call a posture prayer to begin my day, which is to assume postures of surrender, generosity, and mission. This is the way I want to live my day, because I think it's what love looks like. And to follow Jesus definitely looks like living a life of love. So if it's not love I'm living, it's not Jesus I'm following. It's simple, but more complicated in terms of how does that work in real life. So I do those postures to start my day. And then at the end of the day, I review my day in terms of where there was moments where I could have surrendered and didn't, or did surrender. And so I celebrate. I use sort of the examine idea of reflective. It takes me a while to fall asleep, and usually I'm thinking about stuff anyway. So I figure instead of fighting it, I'll just direct my thoughts. I look for places where I received generosity and where I was invited to give generosity, and celebrate it, and then ask for forgiveness where I need to, where I've been stingy. And then same with engagement, a mission, which sounds really big, but really is mostly like when my neighbor interrupted me, did I take the time? Or when my kids asked me to play, did I just shoo them away? Or did I take the time? Am I engaged with people in my life? And just that daily practice has been a real game changer over the last couple of years for me, which is refreshing in some ways, because again, we think the answer has to be complicated, but sometimes it actually is quite simple to pay attention really to what's going on and where the invitations from heaven are coming, where God's saying, hey, pay attention over here. And so for me, just that little tweak of a daily intention and then a daily reflection helps me pay attention throughout the day. And I find myself celebrating a lot more than lamenting these days. And then weekly is a connect with another person, where we ask each other really relevant questions to try to stay honest, and also encourage each other. So I'm not into like accountability where we're beating each other up for not being enough. I, yeah, right. I feel like we have enough of that going on in our lives. But where we're really just saying, like, we're in this together and we're rooting for each other and we're going to help each other. And how is it going really? And how are you really? And how can I pray and help and walk alongside each other? So that also has been beautiful. Sometimes I'll ask leaders, like, who do you confess your sins to? And it's a weird question, because everyone will say, well, God. And the scriptures are clear about that we're forgiven by God when we confess our sins to Him. But it's also clear that when we confess our sins to each other, we're healed. So there's like a healing that happens when we expose our sins to someone real life. So if you're like 12-step fan, which I am, you'll know that you first confess to God, you first confess to yourself, tell the truth, and that's such a hard thing even for ourselves. And then tell the truth to someone out loud, someone else. And there's something about that that is so liberating to the soul. I think it has to do with getting darkness out of our minds and our lives. You're exposing things to the light.
The 12-step community has such a powerful image in there too, of like the phrase that you're only as sick as your secrets.
Right.
And that's part of what confession does. And I've learned so much from the 12-step community in that way. Like, we're so afraid of it as Jesus people, which is just bonkers to me. But the 12-step community has such a powerful discipleship plan that's taken right from the scriptures.
Yeah. And what's cool about this, I call it my hub, once a week. Sometimes it happens over FaceTime or whatever. But the other thing that happens, it's not always dark, terrible things you're sharing. But what you do realize is that when you do share dark and horrible things, there's a commonality to it. Nobody's like, I can't believe it. Everyone's like, yeah, I get that. Right. And so there's also that. It's like a sharing of our own humanness. We're not pretending to be something we're not. And then finding a great comfort in that turns out we're human after all. And then monthly, I have a rhythm where I take a challenge from somebody to spice up my spiritual life. And Infinitum, this practice that I have, they send out about 3 challenges a month to choose from. And usually our hub will choose one to try. And it'll be anything from like, practicing generosity in terms of giving to somebody or something that has nothing to do with you, or just being anonymously generous, just to practice generosity without anyone watching, to like, sometimes fasting or identification with the margins, or going out of your way to get to like a lower socioeconomic neighborhood, and prayer walking or something like that. It's random. It's fun.
So all of what you're talking about is leading into a place of wholeness. Like, it's helping for you to claim your God-given identity. It's helping for you to be the fullness of who you've been created to be. What would you say, like, you're living it, you're in it yourself. What would you say for others that don't have something like that yet? Like, how is it that you have found a stride, a rhythm, a pathway that has allowed you to go, this is what it looks like for me to really dig deep into the love of Christ, and for my roots to grow in a really deep, substantive way? So when storms and wind and waves and all the stuff happens, you're not blown over.
Yeah, I would say I created Infinitum. It's free. I did it because I wanted to share with people what works for me. And like, not a super complicated, I'll meet you in a monastery for, a year. But like, here are some things you can do every day, no matter where you live, no matter who you are, that might actually just get you to go down deeper. And I would say that what happens with just the attentiveness of this. So again, like, I just keep emphasizing to people, I think we have this idea of like super saints living in, prayer convents and stuff. And we just think, oh, that's not for us. But actually, an attentive spiritual life is best lived as a real life, like as a whole life. Like, I encounter God during my life, during the unfolding of my life, relationships, people I don't like, people that cut me off, like teachers that are difficult to work with, and like people that I find hard to love. Like, that's where I encounter the deeper places of the kingdom of God. Parenting, just it's filled with rooted, deep places where we just don't want to go. But when we go there, we're like, whoa, all the gold is in the dirt. And we're just like, the gold has to be somewhere else, but actually it's all hidden in the dirt. So I would say, like, do the stuff that you've got to do. And that's rootedness. I would say wholeness. I take this like the First Thessalonians 5:17, like body, soul, spirit. So what I try to do is pay attention to my body, my mind, will, and emotions, and my spirit. I would say infinitum is the way that I nourish my spirit or at least get my spirit to take charge of those other areas of my life. Body has been a fascinating thing for me. It's always been related to movement, exercise. I have to sweat. I don't know, there's something physical about it for me that releases tension in my life and body. I think when we live a sedentary life, and ministry is a lot like this, by the way, where you get home totally exhausted emotionally, but physically your body's not tired, but you feel tired. So my experience is that if I just go ahead and go outside, go for a hike, go for a walk, go for a run, go to a yoga class, whatever it is, my body catches up with my emotions. And then I actually feel proper tired where I can sleep. And, so I actually feel the body's so deeply connected with our mind, will, and emotions. I don't think we really fully realize it. Um, and then I'd say mind, will, and emotions. Again, I use the 12 steps to keep short accounts on where things are not right in terms of my relationships with other people, even my own relationship, like toxic behaviors that I can see, or my character defects that might be showing up. And I pay a lot of attention to that. And I actually just use the steps in my life almost like a spiritual direction when I need it.
That's, you just said so much. The body piece I resonate with a lot. I don't know that we've done a great job in Christian spaces of talking about how connected the body is to our soul or to our spiritual life, air quote. But I think that if the spirit resides in us as the people of God, then certainly we need to listen to what it is that our body's communicating. And she never lies. She's always telling us like what's going on, stress, aches and pains, or anxiety that shows up in our belly. I think that body work is really significant to be able to go after wholeness, to be in it for the long haul. And, for somebody who's like this, that's never been my experience. Like I've never really worked out my body. But done a great job reading the Bible and praying, or I have paid attention to my emotional barometers. What would you say, like, to just get going with taking care of your body? What's a real easy win?
Well, I think one of the problems when it comes to the body is that we're so used to shaming it. And I think this is true of all spiritual disciplines. Like we embark on them because something's wrong with us and we need to make it right with us, instead of like just opening up to this beautiful integrity, like, and made whole life, where we're experiencing wholeness. So I'm not going to like punish my body or beat it up, or like I'm going to make it do something because it should, because it's bad. But I think I'm going to move because it's going to open up my mind and my will, and it's going to help me process my emotions. I'm going to get outside because it's going to lift my eyes up to the creator of the universe, and I'm going to get out of myself somehow. I remember being on a yoga mat, and when I go to yoga, I take a breathing prayer with me to practice. I think even just breathing, start there. Just start breathing deeply on purpose and recognize that breath is what made humans in the beginning. Like breathe in the ruach of God, the breath of God, and let some of those things out. Exhale, inhale, exhale. If all I could do is get you to do one thing with your body, I get you to breathe deeply. The other thing I do is just get you outside.
You are right
Just go
now. As
outside.
we are recording this podcast, you're sitting outside. I
Right.
love it.
Yeah. And one of the little techniques I've learned over the years is I made a list. I had a psychologist friend of mine. She always gives me some good advice. And she said, make a list of things that actually fill your soul. And when you have some space, like you have a day off or you have a night off or you have some hours, go to the list. Because what'll happen is you will naturally revert to social norms. Like you'll just what's on TV, or you'll do the Netflix, or you'll do whatever. But actually it's not going to fill your soul. But she's like, if you have a list, the things that fill your soul, and you could just go to the list and pick one of those things. It's less, you don't have to actually cognitively make a decision. Your decision is to go to the list, and that list is there for you. And the amount of times that I'll look on that list and like go for a walk is on there instead of, a Netflix series. And I'm so glad I did that instead. Just so make a list. I take a breathing prayer with me to yoga. One of the prayers I use is a prayer called Be Loved, where you breathe in be, which counters this like do mentality. We got to do, we got to do. Actually, we just have to be with God. And then when you breathe out loved. So be loved, which is what God calls us. But the person that taught me to do it on a podcast, actually, what he told me that instead of breathing out love to the world, start by breathing it to your own body. So I'm lying on this mat, I breathe in be, I breathe out love to my body. My back is sore, my foot's hurting me, I'm old, my body hurts. So I'm breathing out loved. I'm like, beloved back, beloved foot, beloved body. And I realized it was the first time I had ever intentionally loved my body. And I realized I had punished it, I had shamed it, I had covered it, I had criticized it, I had not listened to it, but I'd never loved it. And then what I do is just now I just intentionally love my body every time I do yoga. I just be loved by God, by me. And then I let that love kind of just get bigger.
Yeah, I just turned 40 this summer, and I these last 5 years have been a very interesting journey for me in learning to love my body. Late 30s, babies, work, metabolism slowing, and things like nutrition and sleep and weight haven't been things for me, but they've become things for me in the last few years, and learning
Yeah.
that even a roll on my belly or a wrinkle on my forehead or the gray hairs that are like totally coming out here and things that I receive from the world those are not good. Those are not beautiful. Those are not the way that I'm supposed to position myself or place myself in the world. It has been such a ongoing journey for me to figure out, how do I love myself when what I look like or what I do maybe isn't what the world says, or even our Christian culture. There's so much shame and purity culture around like what it is it's supposed to look like in my body. And so I'm a part of this group of women in our neighborhood. And these mamas and I have been doing this weight loss challenge since January, where all of us have officially lost 0 weight since January. And about 6 weeks ago, I like waved the white flag and I was like, I just think the whole posture that we're in is jacked up. Like we're looking at a number on a scale. And that's, first of all, not where I'm finding my value. But second of all, it's not what I want to focus on. What I want to focus on is the strength that my body has, about what she's able to do in a given day, how I'm able to care for my family, how I'm able to do the work that is around me. And maybe that number needs to have far less importance for me. And so our weigh-in Wednesdays, which there's one tomorrow, have taken on a very, very different mindset for me. And so when we have this larger conversation about the things that we're doing daily, weekly, monthly to pursue wholeness and what this tree looks like to be planted deeply, I just think that body conversation is really significant for us. And I would love for the needle to be, for the needle to shift for us around how it is specifically as women that we do that.
Yeah, there's a couple things I found. Like one is the beloved prayer, which has been a game changer for me and my body. The second thing is I feel like a lot of our conversations around body health are related to weight, which then brings with it like all the shame and self-loathing. And I just feel like nobody needs help with that. Like we've got that down. what we need help with is the opposite. We need help in loving ourselves, and not narcissistically. I mean, really holy and healthy. It's a holy thing to love ourselves. And how to figure that out, I think, is a lifetime's work. I remember talking to Deborah Hirsch. I don't know if you know her, but she turned 50. She said to me, Danielle, it's taken me 50 years to just feel at home in my own body. And I think that was a beautiful, like, just even phrase, to feel at home in my own body. And I think that's a little bit about what you're talking about. But what I do want to say to people who are self-loathing and stuck in patterns of like self-indulgence and, like just all that trap, is that you have to figure out how to love yourself even in the midst of that. And the choices that you make for your body are going to be lovingly based, not shame based. So, not for love, but from love. And that's that when your spirit leads you, that's that deeper place where you can actually ask God, even if you don't have love for yourself, He has love for you. And so you can ask God to even just like lend you the love for yourself, And I talk to women a lot about talking to themselves like they would to a younger sister, and just replace yourself with someone that you would talk to, because we talk so nicely to other people. And we're the first ones to be like, girl, don't say that. That's not true. You can do anything. So I'm like, if you just can talk to yourself the way you talk to other, folks in your life, that's not a bad place to begin either.
Okay, so we've talked about roots, and I don't want to ignore the rest of the tree because I think that
Yeah.
you should probably have some trunk and branches and leaves. So lead us into that part of the conversation.
Yeah. So I found this transformational tool from Rwanda. Actually, it was created there for people living transformationally, trying to get past norms that were causing violence and fear. And it's really helped me a lot. They talk about identifying fruit in your life, and honestly, and looking for fruit that you're not happy with, that's bitter. And our tendency, I find, is just to take any kind of like fruit we're not proud of and bury it as fast as possible and just hope to God something else will grow back. But actually, paying attention to that fruit is one of the ways that we can discover how we can transform. So they say identify what that fruit is and then trace it to the branch, which are the actions of your life. Those are the things that you're doing. So even if we think like we're at a shape and the actions are pretty clear, we don't exercise and we eat too much. It's not that complicated. But then they're saying what we do is we do behavior modification techniques for transformation, but it never lasts because we're really just altering a branch, not changing the makeup of the tree. So they say follow the branch to the trunk, and the trunk are your values. And what do you believe is true? And so the values, and again, around like maybe you're not worth it, or work is more important, or what you do is more important than who you are, or your output's more important than how you feel. All of those things will be in the value conversation. And that's a good conversation to have. If you think about a company, lots of times people will redo their value statement, but that still also doesn't work, because actually to get to transformation requires us to go back to the roots of the tree. And the roots of the tree are your beliefs, your deeply held beliefs. And I believe that the deepest held beliefs about who we are best sorted out with God, because He knows us better than ourselves. So every action, every fruit related to an action, related to a value, but held deeply in this root system. And that's why I think in my life, I probably spend more time in the root system than in any other thing. Because if you can get that right, it will naturally bear beautiful fruit in your life.
I don't know that I've ever thought about bitter fruit before, but certainly every single thing in our life is bearing some sort of fruit. So like in in Psalm 1 that talks about bearing good fruit in every season. I just had never went down the other path of like, sometimes there's bad fruit, and that is a reflection of something else that is going on. So paying attention to the whole thing and going back to the roots, that's really helpful.
The guy that taught me the model is a Rwandan guy that saw the rates of domestic violence in his region of Rwanda decrease in 1 year by over 65%. And I just asked him how he did it. And he shared about going through this tree transformation training. And he looked at the fruit in his life of his family life, which was bitter and cold and terrible. And he traced it to his actions, which were violent against his wife when he got angry. And then he traced it to the values where he wanted to be in control. But then he traced it to the roots of what he really believed. And he said he remembered having this conversation with his father about what it meant to be a man. And in that conversation, his father told him that a man is in control and his children respect him, which fueled the values, which created the actions, which made this bitter fruit. So he didn't just have to change the fruit, he had to change the root. And he did. And when he did, he said it was crazy. The changes in his life were so remarkable that everybody from his church, all the guys, came to him and said, "What have you done? Your family's transformed." And he said, "Oh, let me tell you, your life's a tree." And this went on in the whole region. 68% later, decrease in domestic violence because some guys were willing to trace the bitter fruit of their lives and beliefs and values. I mean, it's remarkable.
It reminds me of this process that we take people through in coaching of who do you want to be? And you got to do the things in order to reflect who it is that you want to be. And then you'll have what it is that you want to have. And it's not like a magic potion, rub the genie in the bottle thing, but we often go about it from the behavior modification or from the name and claim it kind of way, that we want to have this. And so we'll do this and then we'll become that. And it's just the wrong approach. So starting from who it is that you want to be, your beliefs, who God has designed you at your core leads you to specific actions. It leads you to behaviors. It leads you to practices and rhythms that allow you to have the kind of fruit in your life that actually is reflective of love and joy and peace and all of that other really good stuff.
Yeah, have you heard of Sami Awad? He's a Palestinian peace activist. He calls this non-linear theology, and he uses it as a peacemaking tool. So he gets in the Middle East, it's pretty hard making peace there, but he gets Jewish widows and Palestinian Christian widows and Muslim widows together. And the first exercise they do is they imagine their best life. And at the end of their life, sort of like what they're imagining as their best possible life. And then they discover, to everybody's surprise, that they all imagine the same things, that they're all imagining peace and that their kids aren't going to die and that violence is stopped and that there's enough food for everybody and people are happy and get along. And then that's their starting place to actually work towards peace, which is basically your coaching model. It's beautiful, starting from the future. I feel like it's really what Jesus does, is he starts from the future because that's where he's from. And he's like, what would it look like if people got along regardless of color or socioeconomic? Like, what would it look like if people loved each other, that there were no more hierarchies of importance, that we were all known as and loved by God and then love each other. And then he does it, he does what the future. Yeah. Anyway, so we're from the future.
Yes. And I mean, the most asked question in the Gospels that Jesus asks is, what do you want? Which is a future oriented question. It's moving you toward this life in all of its abundance, a richer, deeper, more meaningful life than you could ever imagine. And going back to Ephesians 3, like that is beyond, it's just beyond anything we could dream up. It's a really powerful vision, and vision moves us towards creating something different than what we've got right now. I would love for you, as we kind of move to wrap up here, as folks are going through whatever sort of transition, and maybe they're acknowledging they're seeing some fruit that is moldy or bitter or rotten, what would you encourage people to do to get back to the root system? What would be a good question or a shift in thinking that allows them to see some different fruit?
Yeah, I think for me, there's a couple things. One is identifying the root. So that's its own journey. And I think it really is having the courage to be honest about where you see the bitter fruit. So those places that cause you shame, even to talk about, that might be a good place to begin. Sometimes when this is really stuck, professional help's a great idea. I've benefited from some really beautifully, actually Jesus-centered counselors, but that who understand the way my emotional makeup is, and maybe a lot of that stuck beliefs in my life were rooted in trauma in childhood and things like that that just needed help to dislodge. But so to have the courage to name the thing and to look at it instead of just bury it, and just let it go away. But then the other model of transition that I talk about is once you identify what you know needs to change, a belief system, then you actually have to embrace a process to change it. And that's kind of like a whole other thing. And for me, this is like a bridge for me. I use a bridge, but disruption is the invitation. And we also make a big mistake in this a lot of times because we're looking for peace, which we think means the absence of conflict. And Martin Luther King Jr., of course, helped us understand that true peace is not the absence of conflict, it's the presence of justice and wholeness, shalom, of fullness. And disruption is an invitation to get us there. And I think disruption also presents itself as something that we want to just avoid at all costs. And in my experience, disruption is almost every single time, with some very small exceptions, an invitation to wholeness. So I would say don't be afraid of disruption. I would look for the invitation that disruption gives you in your life to see where God's taking you. Yeah.
Disruption is such an opportunity. It is beautiful, and it will keep, in God's loving kindness, I think that God will keep bringing it back again until we accept the invitation, until we say yes to it, because the hope is transformation. The hope is that we become the fullness of who we've been created to be. And God will do anything for that.
That transformation is ever going. I think we often don't get that either because we keep using the metaphor of a butterfly. But I was at a 12-step meeting one time and a guy started by saying he felt like a snake. And I remember thinking to myself, finally, a guy who admits it. And then he went on and he said, every time I think I've grown into this life, my skin starts peeling like it's too small. And I grow more and then my skin starts peeling and I'm too small. And when he was talking, I flipped right back to John 3, the conversation that Jesus has with Nicodemus, and Nicodemus is just like, how do I live this beautiful life? And Jesus is like, you got to be born again. And it was like God just put an echo on in my mind, like born again and again and again and again. Like this kingdom is boundless. So this depth of God's love no one can ever scope the depth of it. And like you said, what he's asking and what he has in mind for us is more than we could even dream about. So we're just touching, even every glimpse of wholeness I have is just touching at what it is that God invites me to live.
Oh man, I would love to have you back next season if you are willing to talk about your book, because it is so much better together when men and women can figure out how to work and do life together. And this whole conversation of wholeness is just like right in the center of it, because even our wholeness is directly connected to the people that we interface with and choose to ask us those hard questions and confess our sins to, et cetera. So this conversation is just like rooted in the middle of such beautiful other conversations that we're having this season. And so yeah, thank you for that. It's a gift. Where can people find you online? Track what you're up to?
Yeah, DanielleStrickland.com. I've got a podcast at DJ Strickland. What else? That's all the Instagram.
We'll post it. You've shared it with me.
You're gonna have to Google me.
Just Google Danielle Strickland, but we'll post it in the show notes and on the website so you guys can get on our mailing list and start listening. You've got a lot, and I'm very grateful for your voice and for how you are one of those people that are on the fringe, amplifying voices on the fringe, looking for those in the margins that are in need of being heard. That is your way of life, and I am very grateful for that. So we are wrapping up
Thanks, April.
every episode this season with 3 questions. And so real quick, 60 seconds or less, tell us your best thoughts on this. First question is, what does it look like for women to be warriors?
What it looks like is for them to know their worth, to tell the truth, and to not be afraid.
What's the number one practice that leads you towards wholeness?
Prayer.
That's real quick. That's less than 60 seconds. I want to follow up, but I'm just going to let it rest. Prayer. Done. If you could wave a magic wand, how would you speak courage into men partnering better with women?
I would exchange their cultural lenses for a kingdom one, so that they could see through lenses that aren't rooted in fear and prejudice and cultural conditioning.
Well, I'm very grateful for you. And I love that I got some firsthand up and close experience with you earlier this year at the Women's Speaker Collective. Susie Gamez is on the podcast this season as well. And Ashley. So 2 amazing platform speakers for the collective. And for those of you women who are aspiring to speak, I would highly recommend it. I think we need more and more women being trained in this stuff and figuring out how do we use the voice that God has given us. So there's so much, Danielle, that you're doing. So we'll be sure to link people to it. But I'm grateful for the conversation around your life as a tree. And I think you've given us all some good stuff to both think about, but more importantly, to work out and to do differently. So thank you.
Amen. Thanks, April. Loved it.
Thank you for joining the Global Fringe. Help us spread the word by rating and reviewing and sharing with your people. If you're excited about this season, become a Patreon on Patreon for as little as $5 a month. Finally, be sure to subscribe so you don't miss a thing. Hey friends, do you love podcasts like the one you just listened to? Have you ever dreamed about having your own? Well, my name is Michael and I work for Truthwork Media. We believe that everyone has a story and every story deserves a podcast. Let us help you get started. Look us up at www.truthworkmedia.com, fill out our questionnaire, and I'll schedule a time to talk. It's really that easy. Truthwork Media. Everyone has a story. Yours needs a podcast.